30 attempts per game against the Houston Texans. They have been decently good, I guess, against the run game, but they've been extremely open against the pass game, making this matchup pretty nice. When you look at Tua specifically as a player, Tua is averaging 21 points per game in all games that he has started and finished. There's one game on his resume for this year that he was injured going into. And then on the other end, Houston is allowing 22 points per game to the quarterback position against them. Overall, it's a pretty good matchup. And then when you look at the fact that Miami's slowly starting to find a footing on offense, health has been a big issue for the team, both at the quarterback and at the wideout position. But last week, we got the boost with Devontae Parker coming back into the Miami offense. Him and Tua pairing up again ever since their time started together last season. He has been Tua's favorite target, along with Mike Gesicki, the tight end. And that continued last week. Parker has averaged 8 targets a game with Tua as his quarterback. So that's extremely consistent target for a passing game that we don't always consider to be high volume, but actually is with Tua at the quarterback. I like this matchup. I like the player overall more than most, and there's a lot of concern about Tua not being it, but as long as the game scripts continue to be the shootout games and or just for some reason this quick passing game is what they want to stick to as opposed to high volume in the run game, I'm going to be leaning on Tua in a lot of leagues that I have him, specifically as a waiver wire pickup. He's available in about 45% of leagues right now. My sit of the week at the quarterback position, on the other hand, is Mr. Ryan Tannehill. He slowly started to find his footing as well over the last couple of weeks after a very slow start. But this Rams matchup is a heavy favor towards the run game. The Rams have been allowing the 5th most points to running backs in the NFL over the last 4 weeks. And when you look at a game script, they no longer have Derrick Henry for the Tennessee Titans. That means Tannehill basically is going to have to do this all on his own, all with his arm. When you're looking at it that way, Julio Jones is still hurt, meaning that it's basically just going to be A.J. Brown as the target, as no other targets have truly emerged in the offense. That's a little bit concerning when you look at the matchup that he's going to have, most likely with shadow coverage with a guy like Jalen Ramsey. At that point, what you're dealing with is an A.J. Brown versus Jalen Ramsey, Tannehill trying to find his scheme, all while Von Miller, the newly acquired player, and Aaron Donald, and Leonard Floyd, and Kenny Young are all bearing down on him on the defensive line and defensive front 7. It's not a matchup I like. The pass defense has been pretty good for the Los Angeles Rams. They're limiting any of the big plays that may lean towards Tannehill's points. And if he's not able to escape the pocket, which I don't think he's going to be able to due to the athleticism of the pass rushers and linebackers on this team, it's going to eliminate that high floor of rushing that he surprisingly has most weeks. So Tannehill is actually someone that I'm avoiding. I've been playing him the last couple of weeks, but there's quite a few other matchups at the quarterback position that I prefer if you're looking for a player at the quarterback position. I would definitely be recommending a Tua Tagovailoa over a Ryan Tannehill, even though Tua is currently ranked behind Tannehill in ECR. Going on to a couple of questions that had popped up in our Patreon chat. If you're not a Patreon already, feel free to join. It's a great space for everyone to basically bounce off of each other. You can ask me and all of the rest of the DWZ crew members as many questions as you could humanly want to on a regular basis. It's popping off pretty much 24/7 thanks to a lot of international people in the chat. But we'll list one of the questions here from our very own Patrick Wright. It is a question near and dear to my heart. Patrick asked earlier today, is Michael Carter an RB2? Is he a flex lock? Or is he just a consideration for a spot fill in your lineups? This is a player, anyone who's been following my rookie content over the last year, that everyone knows I am very high on. The season started off slow, which is something that we kind of expected with Michael Carter's situation with a crowded running back room and the lack of draft capital. But Michael Carter has slowly taken the reins and fully taken a chokehold on this running back position. Tevin Coleman has all but been phased out of the offense due to injuries and inconsistent play. Ty Johnson has been kind of just relegated to a passing game role, which is also surprising, because Michael Carter is even more heavily targeted in the passing game, and he's getting the goal line rushes, the red zone rushes, and in between 20 rushes. So Michael Carter is actually becoming a little bit of a workhorse in this offense. The pace of play for the Jets, because of most of their games being in catch-up mode, has been pretty high. And a fun fact little for you about Michael Carter, he is the third highest targeted player over the last 2 weeks. The only two players to be more targeted at any position than Michael Carter are A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill over the last 2 weeks. Food for thought. For me, he's definitely in the RB2 territory. He doesn't have that pure rushing volume. His touches have been capped at about 14 as his highest on the year. But when mixed in with his receptions, you're looking at a guy who's basically a poor man's Austin Eckler. It's a very good matchup. And with this offensive line slowly gaining its traction, gaining its health over the season, I'm very high on Michael Carter's outlook for the rest of the year. And I definitely think he is higher than just a consideration play going forward. So transitioning back into the start sits at the running back position, a good segue from that question is my start of the week, and that is Mr. Kenyon Drake. He is going to be playing the New York Giants this week, and Kenyon Drake right now is averaging 11 touches per game this season with 4 receptions per game. So in PPR, he's pretty much a lock as a flex consideration, not to mention over the last 2 weeks since Bisaccia took over, since the John Gruden issues popped up, he's averaging 20 points per game in PPR at the running back position. He's very, very effective, and he's very, very cheap. He was a player that I told you guys to be acquiring earlier on in the season and trying to trade for, because no one's really respecting him just based off of his inconsistency over the past. But over the last couple of weeks specifically, as well as at the beginning of the season as well, he's been a target hog in this Raiders offense, and that's with or without the Josh Jacobs injuries that have popped up throughout the season. Take into account the Henry Ruggs news, another target gone, the potential for another missed game for Darren Waller. The targets have to go somewhere, and the guy with the surest hand on those little checkdowns that have been Derek Carr's bread and butter over his career is Mr. Kenyon Drake. I think that continues this week against New York Giants, whose linebacking core is the biggest question mark when it comes to their defense. When it comes to my sit of the week at the running back position, it is actually going to be one that's going to be a little bit of a shocker for a lot of people, and that is Mr. Cordell Patterson versus the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints have allowed the second lowest rush yards per game to the running back position, as well as the second lowest fantasy points per game to the running back position this year. Patterson as a whole has been an extremely touchdown reliant player, and although his touches have increased over the last 4 weeks, his efficiency has also decreased in those 4 weeks. He's extremely touchdown reliant. Like I said, this Atlanta offense, now without Calvin Ridley for the foreseeable future, basically is solely going to rely on Kyle Pitts and Cordell Patterson. We've seen what this anemic offense can look like if they're able to stop the run, i.e. in 2 of the earlier games this season. So I think that a lot of what we're going to see from New Orleans is what they do best, stopping the run. They're going to be stopping the outlet quick passes to Cordell Patterson and basically stuffing them up the middle, making Matt Ryan and Kyle Pitts beat them one-on-one when he's in double bracket coverage. And I just don't think it's going to go well for Atlanta this week. Even with the quarterback situation in New Orleans, I'm fading Patterson in all formats. PPR, it doesn't matter for me. I don't like that play this week. Going back to another question from our Patreon earlier is to pick 3 starters for this week out of DJ Moore, Mike Williams, Kenyon Drake, and Devontae Booker. I'll eliminate one right off the bat just based off the fact that I'm still not impressed with what I've seen. Devontae Booker for the New York Giants, I really just do not like that matchup overall. I don't think it's going to go very well for them against this Arizona defense, who's been pretty stout this season against the run. Take into account also the other option that you have. I just went over the Kenyon Drake play of the week, so I'm obviously starting him. Mike Williams has been extremely consistent. He's been a little bit quieter than his first couple of weeks over the last 3, but he's still seeing the target share, still seeing the touchdowns, and still seeing the overall volume in the passing game. It's just that this Chargers offense has taken a little bit of a step back, so we're not seeing those 25-point games week in, week out. I'm still sticking with him. When I'm looking at the 2 that I would be flipping back and forth to, it would be DJ Moore and Devontae Booker, but just based off the fact that I'm assuming that this is a PPR format, I'm going to lean towards DJ Moore. He's still the only target that I really trust in this offense. And with Christian McCaffrey on his way back, I think you're looking for maybe one more strong showing from DJ Moore on a target volume standpoint. And then we kind of segue back into what we saw with Christian McCaffrey in the first 2 weeks of the season. On to that wide receiver talk. We'll go to the position that I'm probably the least accurate at with you guys that have been watching over this season. So I will say it with a grain of salt. My advice is usually actually just to go with the opposite, but I'll go into the analysis of why these are smart plays from my personal opinion. I'm high on Tua this week, as you know, and I'm high on his counterpart that I actually touched on a little bit in the opening portion for the quarterbacks, and that is Mr. Devontae Parker. As I said, he's been averaging, I was actually wrong, 9 targets per game, not 8, in his games with Tua Tagovailoa. He's finally healthy, and he's still Tua's favorite target. He's one of the biggest stacks going into this week that I'm playing in leagues, just due to the fact that I have a lot of Tua and Devontae Parker. If you can stack Devontae Parker with Tua in DFS plays, I think it's a smart move based off of their costs. They're pretty low. I think Tua is at about 7,300, and I think last time I checked, Devontae Parker somewhere in the 6,000 range, which is pretty average for a normal wide receiver that isn't a wide receiver 3 on the team. That's a wide receiver 1 quarterback stack that I actually like. Obviously, lean towards Lou and Tyler's opinion when they talk to you a little bit later this week, but it wouldn't be a bad play for you, as well as just a normal fantasy. I'm actually stacking them in 2 leagues that I've got Tua in. I also have Devontae. I'm looking for a big showing from the 2 up against a defense that I really think they can take advantage of in the pass game, like I said, with Houston. My sit of the week is actually a hometown favorite of mine, and that's Mr. Tyreek Hill. So as I said, he's the second highest targeted player in the league over the last 2 weeks. But Tyreek is actually what I assume to be the target that they're going to be trying to take away in Green Bay this week. With no Aaron Rodgers, they're trying to slow down this game. That I think that Green Bay is going to accept a nickel and dime, death by 1,000 paper cuts type of game to slow it down with Jordan Love at the helm, as opposed to a shootout that they would have preferred with Aaron Rodgers. Keeping that in mind, it makes more sense for their cornerbacks and their DBs, which have actually been pretty stout against the pass this year, to pay more attention into double coverage, a guy like Tyreek Hill who can take the top off of a defense, as opposed to a guy like Travis Kelce. Due to the fact that Aaron Rodgers is not there, like I said, I think it's a slower gameplay, and they're going to want to play game control with the ball, rush the ball, and then make KC be consistent on offense, which is something that they have not shown yet this season, with Patrick Mahomes making uncharacteristic errors left and right. I would be avoiding Tyreek and avoiding the other pass options outside of Travis Kelce, but I am optimistic because Clyde Edwards-Helaire will be coming back soon. It most likely will not be this week, but we're looking at next week most likely as his return, so I think the offense takes an uptick, but I'm avoiding Tyreek. If you have other plays, if you're strong at wide receiver, I think he's just going to be a little bit overwhelming against this Green Bay pass defense, and this is going to be more of like one of his 8-point games as opposed to his 20-point games. Transitioning into another question from our Patreon, we had a question from Mr. JC. He asked me, Danny Dimes or Carson Wentz this week? So this one is more of a matchup dependent question for me more than a difference in play. Carson Wentz has been surprisingly consistent, even in his quote-unquote bad games where he makes boneheaded mistakes, which seems to be every week. He's still consistently putting high fantasy outputs because their passing volume is so high. But with Frank Reich coming out this week in his media press conferences and repeatedly commenting on how they need to increase the workload for Jonathan Taylor, who's seen a minimized touch role for some reason in the rushing game, even though he's averaging over 5 yards a carry on the season. I think they are going to stick to that. It's up against the Arizona defense for Danny Dimes, but this Colts offense gets to go up against the Jets defense, where the Jets beat the Bengals last week, but they still give up over 30 points. I think that could be continuing this week, but I think there's going to be a lot more rushing. They're going to try and take control. They're going to try and minimize this in a primetime situation and truly show Carson Wentz's capability to run the offense and not make these boneheaded mistakes that can quote unquote piss the game away. So for me, I'm going to be leaning Carson Wentz. I don't trust this New York Giants offense with all the injuries right now. Saquon Barkley is in line to play this week, according to the reports, but he's once again coming off an injury. All the other wide receiver options are still injured. The best one is Kadarius Toney right now, but he's still coming off of yet another second injury for this season. So I would be avoiding Danny Dimes until the weapons start to kind of get back into place, specifically until Saquon is healthy, just to be a little bit on the safe side. So I'm rolling with Wentz this week. So transitioning back into the start sits, we'll go into the category that I've been the most accurate on. As any of you that have listened over the last couple weeks have known, I've been pretty good with my hits on the tight ends positions. And if you've been playing them, they've paid dividends. My play last week was Dan Arnold in a non-tight end premium. He got you 15 points last week without a touchdown. I chalked that up as good. He saw 10 targets in that Jacksonville game. He caught 8 of them for 68 yards. That's a solid play. This week is one that you may chalk up to a homer pick, but I'm not doing it as a homer pick. I'm doing it based off of purely stats, and that is Mr. Cole Kmet versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Cole Kmet in his 6 games with Justin Fields at the helm has seen 5+ targets in 5 of the 6 games. So there's only one game, which was the week 3 game against the Browns, where he did not see 5 targets with Fields at the helm. Currently in the Chicago offense, he's seeing a 20% target share, second only to Darnell Mooney, who's sitting at the 26% target share. So between Mooney and Kmet, they're seeing half of the targets that are going to all wide receivers or pass catchers in this offense. Fields of the last 4 games has thrown the ball over 23 times in each one of the games. The pass volume has increased since his first 2 starts. They're relying less on the rush game just based off of the overall injuries and the game scripts. They're having to keep up with a lot of big offenses currently. And so I'm leaning towards the Cole Kmet play. He's yet to see the touchdown yet this year, and going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who rank in the top 10 for the most points allowed to the tight end position this year, I'm going with Kmet this week. I like it. I like the play. Stick to my guns. I'm playing him in 3 of my leagues right now. I'm excited for the play. I think it's going to be the week that we finally see a above average play from a guy who's kind of underwhelmed this year for a lot of fantasy owners. And my sit of the week at the tight end position is actually going to be the exact same game, but on the other side. And that's Mr. Pat Freiermuth. I know what you're saying, guys. The targets are there. The production should be there with the targets there. But I'm telling you right now, the Chicago defense will let you win anyway other than the tight end position. They're currently sitting number 2 behind only the Arizona Cardinals, and they're allowing 2.9 points per game in PPR format to the tight end position. Outside of 1 touchdown to Austin Hooper on a broken play, they would be literally averaging under a point a game allowed to the tight end position. Don't play your tight ends versus the Chicago Bears. Pat Freiermuth only has 2 weeks this season of high target volume, didn't convert them into a high catch percentage last week. He saw the touchdown, yes, in that late game winner, but it's not going to happen against Chicago. I would be avoiding him. I would be playing Cole Kmet, who's basically free in all formats at the tight end position. Railing off the last 2 questions that I've got in my arsenal from Jake Dutton. He asked A.J. Dillon or Nyheim Hines this week. So again, this one is going to a game script. They want to control the game in Green Bay this week against the Kansas City Chiefs, and they want to force Patrick Mahomes to win with a nickel and dime game. How do you do that? You control the clock and you run the ball. A.J. Dillon has seen an increased workload over the latter half of the season thus far. I think that continues, especially with the lack of weapons that are in this passing game, the Tunyon ACL injury, the Devontae Adams coming off of the COVID list this week, and Aaron Rodgers not being at the helm. They're going to rely on the running game. I don't think they're going to throw basically Jordan Love to the wolves. I guess pups, if you want to call the KC defense wolves. And I think it's a better play than Nyheim Hines, who's actually seen a decreased role in the pass game, which has basically been the only thing propping up his fantasy value over the last year and a half. He only saw 2 targets 2 weeks ago. He saw 3 last week. It's not sustainable for his value. You're hoping for the touchdown play, which, if all accounts are correct and Frank Reich is a true man to his word, is going to go towards Jonathan Taylor as opposed to Nyheim Hines. So, Jake, I'm going with A.J. Dillon this week. And then the last question that I've got for you guys was from Mr. Cole McGregor in the chat. Rest of season, are you thinking Christian Kirk or A.J. Green? This is a good question. It dives into the Arizona offense, which has been a little bit hard to project this season. When I'm looking at this, I'm actually leaning towards AJ Green. It doesn't look like he may play this week, but for the rest of the season, he's consistently seen 5 targets in every game but one this season. He's converting on the deep shots, which are not really something that you would see from him since he's lost a little bit of the speed. But I'm a lot higher on AJ Green than I thought I would be at this time during the year. Christian Kirk has been inconsistent. A lot of his big games have come from the touchdown games, which is pretty consistent with how he's been. But the target volume has actually been spread out pretty easily in this Arizona offense and evenly among the wide receiver positions. DeAndre Hopkins isn't the target hog that he has been in previous seasons, and it's honestly helping this Arizona offense go a little bit more smooth. But the deeper targets and the big plays that are giving you the yardage, and surprisingly, the consistent connection this year have been going to AJ Green as opposed to DeAndre Hopkins or to everyone's darling this year, including mine, Rondale Moore. So I'm going to be leaning AJ Green rest of season as opposed to Christian Kirk. That's exclusively for 2020. 2021. I don't think that translates into next year. AJ Green is most likely gone next year. But for the rest of the year, I think he's a consistent wide receiver 2 on a very high volume passing game with Kyler Murray at the helm. So I think it's a good play going forward. And then we actually did have one more question in the chat from Mr. Austin Hasenauer. I would assume that's how you say your last name. Sorry, Austin, if I butchered it. And that's, what's up, Dallas? Start Jerry Jeudy or Darrell Williams, a 5-point PPR. Based off of what we saw from Gore last week, who kind of came out of nowhere for the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm going to be leaning Jerry Jeudy on this one, even in the half PPR. I normally would be leaning that flex position to a Darrell Williams, but with Jerry Jeudy coming back, he saw 5 targets last week. I think that's going to increase again this week. The Denver matchup isn't terrible. Oh, good. Glad I got the punctuation right, pronunciation right. But I'm leaning Jerry Jeudy in that matchup specifically. Darrell Williams basically saw his overall rush volume and his target volume shrink horrifically last week. If you go and look at the splits with him and Gore, it was basically Gore's game to win or lose last week. They leaned on him pretty heavily, and I think it's because he's a little bit better in the pass game. Darrell Williams is pretty much a non-factor in the pass game, and they just can't rely on him long-term, even in the screen game, so they had to find another option. For some reason, they aren't sprinkling in Jerick McKinnon as much as they probably should be based off of his pass catching chops. But overall, Darrell Williams was never really a big play for me. And I think against that Green Bay front that has actually been a little bit better against the pass and the run this year on defense, I think I'm avoiding Darrell. I'm starting Jerry Jeudy based off of the volume and the fact that he's 1 week healthier. He looked good last week, and on third down, Teddy once again was relying on him. So I'm leaning Jerry Jeudy in that play. And I think that's it, guys. That's basically been all the questions that we've wrapped up from viewers and from our overall Patreon chat. You got my start sits at every position. If I had to tell you, I got to tell you again, the lock of the week is obviously at tight end for me. That seems to be my bread and butter this week, and I'm going with the Cole Kmet play. Thanks for tuning in. As always, you can catch me pretty much every other week on here with Kyle August on the start sits. But I am Dallas, and you can catch my rookie rundown releasing this Sunday. It's going to be a good episode, so tune in. Thanks for